For many of us, the news over the past week of the pandemic subsiding and the pending return to a sense of normal life is both welcome and long overdue. But one challenge that remains for us as a country, one that was laid bare across the nation and world last year, is the often startling lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion in so many of our public and private institutions. Good morning and welcome. I'm Mike Reith, publisher of Delaware Business Times. On behalf of our team and the Small Business Development Center, we're glad that you're able to join us for this timely, insightful look at how diversity at work benefits everyone. We hope that you'll come away from today's discussion with actionable steps that you can take in your organization to recruit, employ, and successfully manage a more diverse workforce. I'd like to thank the sponsors of our program today, including Artisans Bank, BNY Mellon Wealth Management, Chase, Comcast Business, Discover, Harvey Hanna and Associates, and the Newcastle County Chamber of Commerce. Their support is greatly appreciated and makes this presentation possible. Thank you for giving us your time today and for attending this morning. I'd like to now turn things over to Margot Rain from the Small Business Development Center. Margot, good morning.
Good morning, Mike. Thank you so much. The partnership between the Delaware SBDC and the Delaware Business Times is highly valued by the SBDC. We are grateful that we have been able to produce programs over the last year in response to the pandemic by providing information on accessing the various governmental programs available for Delaware businesses and how businesses could protect their employees and themselves. We would not have been able to provide these programs without the support of our sponsors, Artisans Bank, BNY Mellon, Chase, Comcast Business, Discover, Harvey Hanna and Associates, and the Newcastle County Chamber of Commerce. I would like to welcome everyone today to this important and timely topic. But before we get started, I would just like to ask everyone to have a piece of paper and a pen ready, as Dr. Joe will have a short exercise for us all, and I know you're going to want to participate in this. Also, I will be checking the Q&A section for your questions, so please feel free to enter them, and I will collect them and ask them at the end of the presentation. I was delighted to find out that we have an expert on this topic in the Lerner College, and I have really enjoyed getting to know her on this while working on this program. I would like to introduce our speaker, Jennifer Joe, Ph.D. and CPA. She is the Whitney Family Endowed Professor of Accounting and the Cohen Family Diversity Officer in the Lerner College of Business at the University of Delaware. Dr. Joe is an accounting expert. She is an award-winning researcher for her studies examining how key institutional factors impact the quality of corporate financial reporting, including audit litigation, regulations, audit quality, and data analytical tools, and the role of cognition in decisions using accounting information. Jennifer's recent research investigates diversity in U.S. corporations and business schools. She teaches accounting and the role of race in business. She is a dedicated advocate for diversity and inclusion excellence in higher education. Welcome, Dr. Joe.
Good morning and good afternoon. I should say we're coming up on noon. So good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here to chat with you. So if I could have my slides queued up, that would be terrific so we can get started. Everyone, I appreciate that you have chosen to spend some time with us today. So I would like, as much as possible, to discuss, diversity, equity, inclusion could take a week long, it could take a month long. But we're going to try to get to some nuggets. And so I have 5 things that I'd like you to consider if you are a business leader and you're looking to enhance your diversity and within your organization. So Leanne, can I have the next slide? So the first thing I would say is I would like you to understand that, to be effective with your diversity strategy, you have to consider 3 key factors: diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's only when we have all 3 of these factors that we can really have an organization where everyone, and notice I say everyone, I'm not just talking about the person of color, but everyone in the organization feels that they're valued and appreciated and that they can contribute. So let's think about each of these things separately. For diversity means having people of different backgrounds, age groups, genders within an organization. But that does not mean that just because the organization has people of these different backgrounds, that means that we have an inclusive organization. Because you could have people in our organization, but their self-expression, their ability to contribute is being suppressed and denied in the organization. So first, we want to make sure that the organization has diversity, and could understand that each person is, comes from different race and things like that. But the next step we want to go to is to building an inclusive culture that makes people in that organization feel that they are valued as an individual, right? That they have the support so that they can, and the commitment from the organization and from other members in the organization, and then they feel open and willing to contribute to the organization. And then the third piece that I want you to consider is equity. So can I have the next slide so that I can illustrate the difference between equity and equality? So oftentimes when people think of equality, they consider giving everyone the same access. But what do we really mean by that? So if we look at this picture that I'm showing you, and I love this graphic because I think it clearly illustrates. If one were to say, we will give everyone the same thing. So there's a game, what the illustration here is showing. The whole idea is everyone should be able to view the game. And so if a policymaker said, okay, there's a tall fence and I'm going to give everyone a stand or a box to stand on so that they can see the game. But we have people of different heights. We have a disabled person. Giving a disabled person a box does not help them because they still cannot see the game, right? So on the left side, if we just think of, okay, just equality, treating everybody equal and giving them the same thing, giving everyone the same thing is not the same as creating equity. Equity is the result. And the result that we're going for is everyone should be able to see the game. So we might have to adapt what we give to each person. So as you would notice on the right side of the image, the person who is in the wheelchair has been given a ramp, and the ramp is taller than all of the other access points that other people have. The tall individual did not need a box. They could already see very, very clearly, right? So this is what we mean, that when we have all three things, then we can put them together and say, we have a diverse workforce. Our organization appreciates and includes the data and the information that they're getting from all members, that we are creating an atmosphere of equity. And then everyone in the organization feels that they belong and can contribute to a successful organization. As we see in this image, now all three characters can talk about the game, they can access and say what they thought was effective about strategy. Everyone has the opportunity to do so. So before we continue, I always like to do this exercise with my audience, and I hope that everyone will participate. So can we have the next slide? What I'd like you to do is to get a sheet of paper, and I want you to create, you don't have to make it pretty. I just want you to create sort of a 5x6 table. And on the leftmost column, I want you to list your 6 closest personal contacts. But it's important, these people should not be your family members, right? And they shouldn't be people in your household. So I want you to think of your 6 closest contacts. They can be professional, they can be personal. Just think about, who do you go to for advice? When you want to have a discussion on an important topic, who do you go to, or who comes to you and asks you questions when they want a sounding board? So if you could take some time and write those 4 names, those 6 names down, and then I want you to leave 4 additional columns to the right, because I'm going to ask you to provide some information later on. And I'm going to give you about, there we go. And the next slide is up. And now I'd like you to provide some information about those people. And so I'm going to ask you what profession that person is in. So go ahead and write profession, write their gender or identity, write their race and ethnicity, and then write their age. And I'm going to do the exercise as well, so that I could see that we are, see what my timing is like, and hopefully we'll be around the same time. Okay, I think you should be beginning to get some information from the details that you have put in. And for most people, when they prepare this, just like myself, we'll find some things out about ourselves. I thought that I knew a very diverse group of people and I interact with a very diverse group of people. But when I looked at my lists in terms of their profession, they might have been diverse in terms of their gender or their race, but I tended to know people who were attorneys and professors. There was a strong bias in my group for a particular type of profession. Um, for some people, when they do this, they realize that there's not much diversity in the age groups, that they tend to know people within 10 years, 10 years older or 10 years younger than themselves. And so, oftentimes, or for some people, they found that their closest contacts were people who were all of the same gender. And the reason I wanted to share this with you is so that you start thinking about how can I achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion if I'm only surrounded by similar people?
Dr. Joe, how do we go about diversifying our contacts?
Well, thank you for asking that, Margot. I actually prepared our discussion to talk about that. So the first thing that, the second thing, our first thing about diversity that we wanted to cover today was to understand what we mean by diversity, right? And we covered on the three inputs: diversity, equity, and inclusion, so that we can achieve that belonging. The second thing that I want you guys to know is that diversity requires intentionality. Okay. So can I get that next slide up? All of us are biased. And when I say bias, I'm not talking about the traditional way that we considered bias in the past, meaning that you had racial prejudice. That's not what we're talking about. We're actually talking, this is an area that I do research in. What we're talking about bias, we're talking about the cognitive biases with which we approach life. And there are lots of books. Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel laureate, just recently put out a book on the topic. So let's think about all these biases we have. And here are some examples. Number one is we all have an affinity bias. We tend to like people like us, people who look like us, people in our profession. And that's the idea behind the activity that I had you do, is that you have similarities. I like interacting with other professors because they understand the theory, they know they understand academics, and it's easy to have that conversation with them. And so if you were to ask me, Jennifer, who do you want to nominate to be on a committee? I am likely to pick another professor. It might be a white male professor that I think is an expert, but I'm picking a professor. I didn't think of maybe there could be a community leader that would fill the role. Confirmation bias means that we do not consider alternatives. We have come to a conclusion, or we have a proposition in our mind, and we seek information that confirms our proposition rather than thinking about the alternative, right? This can be quite detrimental if you're an attorney, or if you want to have a business strategy against competition and you only think about your product and your strategy without thinking about what could be the counterattacks, you're not going to be successful. Same thing with diversity, right? We have to consider alternatives. Perception bias, many of us have that. We put people into groups and stereotype. This is how I think people from X group behave, rather than treating a person as an individual. And then the fourth type of key bias that I I think that we should consider is that most of us want to conform. So we want to go with the flow rather than being the, the person for change. Oftentimes in organizations, you will hear, this is how we've done it. At the University of Delaware, there's a joke, that this is the Delaware way. Well, yes, that's the Delaware way, and you would continue to perpetuate a particular type of discussion only if you conform to that rather than considering how things are done. You should also recognize that when you're trying to counter norms, it really requires a lot of work. So you should not be daunted by the fact that, diversity is laborious. And many of you, I've seen comments from people who said, my organization has been trying and we haven't been making headway. Consider the fact that your organization might only have been doing this for 1 or 2 years, definitely less than 10 years. But we have 400 years of a history in this country that perpetuates certain stereotypes. So we have to allow ourselves some space in understanding this, right? And then the third point I want to make with respect to intentionality is to realize that you have to work and be very, very deliberate when you're trying to encourage perspectives from others. It might change how you have business meetings. You might be using the format that you use to collect ideas. Those might have to change. We just have to understand that these things require work. Okay. The third thing I'd like to share with you is that the organization has to change. You can't say that, remembering what we started off with, diversity, equity, and inclusion are these 3 key pieces. Well, we can't have diversity without organizational change. If you say you want a diverse workforce, but you only recruit from a certain population, and I'll show you an image of that in a minute, then you're not going to achieve that. Ask yourself, what is the culture at your workplace? Is your culture such that women feel comfortable in your climate? If it's a male-dominated profession and you have certain hyper masculine images around, are you willing to make changes to your space? Are you willing to stop having certain images in the locker rooms and in the closets where people feel that they're uncomfortable in that space? These are the things that organizations have to ask themselves. And then the organization should say, well, how am I going to listen? If, for example, your company had photos of all of the people, the Hall of Fame greats of the organization, I'm not saying to remove those photos, but ask yourself, what else can we add? What else can we celebrate? You might be not thinking about what else you could celebrate that could make other people in the organizations feel included. If you have your employee recognition dinner held at a place called the Master's Plantation, think about how that would make your employees of color feel, particularly your Black employees. So don't cancel the dinner, but consider the location. These are all things that I'm saying that are not necessarily difficult things to do, but you have to be willing to change. And then who speaks, right? Is there only the leader of the company that gets to speak? If only the leader of the company gets to speak, then you might be missing important issues that could be observed by the people at the lower level who are executing the strategy. So I'm going to drill down and give you an example because this question actually came in before the presentation, and I thought this would be a good point to address it in the presentation. if you want a diverse workforce, then how you do your recruiting is going to be important. So when we look at this candidate pool, what do you think about it? Right? We look at this picture and it looks like it's a good candidate pool. It has men, women, it has a couple of people of color. So it looks like a well-rounded candidate pool. But next slide, please. But what if this is really the full population? And when you were recruiting, you recruited on the left half of the picture and you left all those other people out on the right half. And, I like this particular picture that I chose because you can see that there are a lot more women on the right side of the picture. There's a little more diversity on the right side of the picture. And so we have to consider when we're recruiting, what is the entire population? Are we targeting? And most important, our initial recruitment is going to be key. So next slide, I want to talk to you about some of the things, what we mean by smart recruiting. It means, first of all, drawing from that whole population that I showed, because really, if you start off with half of the talent pool, you can't do anything else to make up for that after the fact. That's what research has shown. That it's the most important step is drawing from that full pool. So what else can you do? You can actually call people and ask them to apply. Research has shown that women and people of color, generally when they see an ad, they will look to make sure that they have 75 to 80% of the items that are listed before they even apply. But, men tend not to do that. People from majority groups tend not to do that. They think I have, 20, 40% of the skills, I'm going to give it a shot. So if you have to identify candidates and then you have to encourage them to apply. So how do you identify candidates? This is where having a diverse set of contacts can help, because you can ask those friends to use their network to reach those diverse applicants, right? You can say, for example, Margot can come to me and say, Jennifer, we are looking for a manager. We need these skills. Do you know anyone in this network who can, in your network, who would be an applicant? I could post that ad. I can connect to that ad on my LinkedIn page, and people who know me who are from diverse populations, then they have access to that ad. So you have to think about who are your contacts and how are you going to use them. And then you have to identify outlets that reach. For example, there's diversejobs.com where you can go out instead of going only to a particular, generic page. Think about where the talent lies. If I wanted to hire a diverse group of business professionals, I would go to the ALPHA, which is the Association of Latin and Hispanic American Professionals Network. I would go to National Black MBA. I would go to National Association of Black Accountants. These are just several places where I know I would see a diverse talent pool. All right. Fourth item that I'd like to talk to you about is that diversity is good for business. Diversity is actually extremely good for business. We look at data, and I'll show you some in a minute, that consumers are definitely more diverse than they have been in the past. And when surveys have been done, employees, particularly the young job seekers, they prefer to work at an employer where there is diversity. I even have an anecdote where I have a friend who is retired, well, almost retired, and he refused to be fully retired because he said, my job was the place where I got the most diversity. And I realized that if I stayed at home and I retired completely, I would only see people in my temple and in my country club, and I would not have the breadth of diversity that I have at my job. Okay, so many employees are attracted to a workplace where there's diversity. Uh, Innovation comes strongly from having diverse populations. You know, research has shown that the companies that have uh, diverse leaders are more likely to be the innovation leaders in their market segment. So when I say market segment, whatever is that business group that they're in, the diverse companies are more innovative than their competitors. And in terms of performance, research has shown that, you know, diverse management teams, when the leadership team is diverse, revenues are even higher than their competitors. Okay, so thinking about populations and our consumers, what this graphic shows you is that the younger your consumers are, the more they care. So you will notice that probably the older generation, um, you know, social justice and diversity was not is not as important to them, but the younger population, it is very important to them. And most people that I talk to, when they're marketing, they need to market. Yes, the older population has the wealth, but they're also not in their buying years anymore. So the people who are in their buying years are the Gen X and the millennials. And so if you want those consumers, then you're going to have to start thinking of diversity. Similarly, if you look at who, just not who is who as a consumer in terms of their thinking, but also in terms of the demographics of the consumer, you will see that most of the growth in the US consumer population is coming. Look at the Hispanic population growing, the African American, almost every population of color is growing. So, as a business, if you want to attract customers, then you're going to have to do more in terms of attracting those customers and recognizing that it's good. The fifth item I'd like to share with you today is that diversity means inclusive excellence. So oftentimes people, you know, and it's usually, I'm going to not ascribe negative thoughts to them. I'm just going to say that they're ill informed. So some people will say, well, do you want me to lower the standards in order to get diversity? Absolutely, that is not the issue that we're saying. In many cases, the diverse candidate, once given an opportunity and given that equal access to show that they are strong, are the best candidates for the position. There is a wealth of Black and Latinx talent that is not being drawn into the workforce, even as we speak today. For example, can I have the next slide? I would like to share some information with you. So if you click, there we go. Unemployment rate. So if we look at the unemployment rate, we will see that when you focus on people who have a bachelor's degree, the unemployment rate, these are, you know, still low numbers, but what you will notice is that the unemployment rate for people of color is higher for people, you know, than for whites. And so if you wanted to get somebody with a bachelor's degree, then if you targeted the minority population, you would have better access than other people who are not targeting that population. You have a wider population to draw from. The second thing I wanted you to see is the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate has been exaggerated for people of color, and particularly post-pandemic. I don't have the post-pandemic labor information for you because I like to pull my data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and those official charts have not been put up yet. But some of the surveys that we have seen report that as a result of the pandemic, Black, Hispanic, and Asian managers were more likely to lose their jobs earlier on in the pandemic and last to recover. So we still have many, many top highly qualified people who are waiting to get back into the workforce. And the third thing I want to show you is the earning capacity. We still have issues with, systemic issues related to income. And so even across degrees, people of color, if you look at bachelor's degrees and you see who is being paid, you'll notice that people of color, even when they have advanced degrees, are not being paid as their competitors. And so if you target and pay fair wages, then your business will become a major competitive force because you'll get that innovation and higher performance from diversity, and because you're attracting a stronger candidate pool. So can we go to the next slide? I worked on a project where we interviewed Black professionals and asked them, who were the people that helped you most in moving forward in your career growth? And then when they identified those people, we then interviewed those white allies and said, why did you help that person? And one of the most striking findings from our research project was that white professionals were not doing it because they were trying to be altruistic. They were doing it because they saw an advantage. They said, look, I saw a very talented person in my organization who was not being talented. This person did work that made me look good. And in promoting that person in the organization, it benefited my career. So it was interesting to us that this was not a charity case. When we talk about ally relationships, we're not talking about, you're reaching down and helping a disabled person. No, the person that you are helping actually brought strong talent, and just giving them that opportunity and having them on the team, the white ally said they performed better and they moved up further in the corporation. So I'd just like you to consider those 5 factors. I am going to stop, my formal part of the presentation now, and I'd like to open it for questions that you have.
Thanks, Jennifer. That was wonderful. So I have a few questions for you. I'm still waiting for a few more to come in from the audience. So first question, small businesses, one of their concerns is that of employee loyalty, as it costs a lot to train and keep a person. How does a diverse workforce affect employee loyalty?
So there's some interesting findings on, and I think things that would not surprise us, right? One of the things you have to do as an organization to have a loyal workforce is to build employee commitment to a workforce. And when you build employee commitment, then your employee stays with the organization, is willing to give a lot to the organization. Well, the next question is, when do employees feel committed to the organization? And the answer is not, an earth-shattering answer. It's probably one of those type answers that my mom says, did you need a research study for that? And the answer is fair treatment and mutual respect. When someone believes that they are being treated fairly by an organization, when they feel that they're respected by their organization, then they're willing to sacrifice for that organization. And what we find is that the bond between organizational commitment and employee is stronger for women and people of color. We don't have details on why that occurs fully, but my conjecture from reading other research and knowing the experiences of people of color in the workforce is that my hypothesis is that people of color face and women face a lot of discrimination on the job. There's countless research showing that. And when they find an organization that respects their talent and treats them fairly, they are less likely to leave that organization to go to the unknown. So it's an advantage for a small business because they're small, they're adaptable, they're more capable of having that one-on-one relationship between managers and employees, and that they can create that bond and commitment that will help them to retain that employee on a long-term basis.
Thank you. Our next question, attraction and retention of minorities in specialty industries such as power plant technology. What are some of the challenges similar or other organizations facing with diverse employees in these environments? In other words, the STEM area.
Yeah, so the STEM area is always a challenging one. And actually, I can think of two examples that I'd like to share in talking about this. One I'll think about is at the University of Delaware and at universities in general, we have an underrepresentation of women and of people of color in the STEM field. And so they have been these grants across the country called advanced grants from the National Science Foundation to study. And what we have found is two key factors will attract and retain people. One is mentoring, and the second one is creating community. And before I start talking about those, let me dial back and say, why do we have a problem with women and, certain minority groups being in the STEM field? It's because of what happens through K through 12 and stereotyping. Again, research funded by the NSF has shown that women and Black and Hispanic students are not encouraged in math. Teachers oftentimes in K through 12 will not call on these students. They're more likely to call on males. They're more likely to call on Asians and whites. And again, it's that stereotype that Asian and white males are strong mathematically and quantitatively. And so their successes are rewarded and encouraged. And then those of women and Black and Hispanics are discounted. So that's where, if we want to go all the way down to the root, that I would say people in the power and technology industry can start collaborations with high schools and middle schools if they want it. But let's move up and say, what can you do currently? Special internship programs that target. So you can go to college, you can go to historically Black colleges, you can go to Hispanic serving institutions, and you could identify people who are studying in the field that you're interested, and you can bring them on to your business and have an internship program. But having internship is not enough. People need mentoring, right? Mentoring is very important. That's one of the things we've discovered in our own program at the University of Delaware, that you need to show someone who oftentimes doesn't have a family background, in the profession. So they don't know how to navigate that profession, that they need a strong mentor. And the mentor does not have to be a person of color. The mentor is just anyone who is successful in the field and is willing to be a leader and help the other individual and show them the path, right? And then the third thing that the organization needs to do is to build community around the people. So when you attract and you bring in your interns, introduce the interns with each other, allow them to collaborate and learn to get that peer support. It's that combination of a guide into the profession and a peer that is sharing the same experience that encourages that person to stay and persist and see the success. The mentor helps them to see the success. And then the peer helps them to see, okay, you're just like me and you're doing it. And that can be pretty successful. I want to share with you if we have time. I don't know how we're doing on time, but
We're okay.
okay. So I want to share with you an example when I was doing the project that I mentioned, the 3 ways Black people need support. We actually interviewed a professional who told us his experience, and he had one particular female. He was in the sports industry, and he worked with a Black female who he thought was very, very strong, and recognized that the organization that he was in did not have many women, did not have many women of color, period, or people of color. And so he decided that he wanted to have an internship program, but his organization did not want to support it. And so he made a decision. He said, you know what? I'm going to give up my personal administrative assistant. I'm going to give that person up for a year so that I can have the funding. And he brought in and targeted women of color who were interested in the sports industry. And after doing the program, his interns were so strong and his organization hired him that the executives came to him and said, we don't want you to run this program only for yourself. We now want the entire organization to have access to your interns, because they recognized that by focusing on the population, they were actually getting stronger talent than when they were trying to compete with everyone else in the larger population. So I think focused recruiting and mentoring could really work and would be very successful in the power technology field.
Okay, great. So what is the most practical thing a small business, less than 50 employees, can do to improve inclusion?
Well, I would, if I'm thinking about a small business, I would say the natural competitive advantage of a smaller company is your ability to change and to be nimble. Large corporations, they have a lot of bureaucracies. They have to ask for, several chains in the command to approve and make changes. As a smaller company, you can change almost immediately. One of the first things I would say is, what is the climate in the organization? So if I go back to the question you asked me about how do you build employee commitment and loyalty, one of the most important things is the culture within that organization. The organization should say we have zero tolerance for microaggressions, outright racism. I think most organizations have that. But then, do you allow certain sexist jokes to perpetuate? Do you allow people to make comments about people of color in your workplace? If you change the culture in your workplace becomes inclusive, then you attract employees who feel that they are valued, and then word spreads, right? Diversity attracts diversity. In talking about culture and climate, I want to share with you that in surveys done, 51% of Asian women, 58% of Black women, 56% of Latinas, and 52%. So notice all of those are more than half. All of those people surveyed said they're highly on guard at work. More than 50% of Black, Hispanic, and Latin employees say when they feel like they're on guard at work, they have difficulty sleeping and it affects their performance at work. And when they feel that way, it also makes them more likely to leave their job. And when they're asked why they feel that way, they said it's because of peers and supervisors making negative comments about their gender and their race, not specific, doesn't have to be specific to themselves, but just in general. And that creates anxiety for them because they worry about, if you're saying this about other people, what are you saying about me? So I think the leaders in a small organization could make it very clear and call on people. If you're in a meeting and you hear a comment, stop and ask that person, why are you saying that? If you're in a meeting and your female subordinate is not being allowed to speak and somebody's constantly speaking over them, stop it, right? It's up to the leader to make that change.
Thank you. We have two questions that are sort of similar, so I'll give you both of them. Diversity can be measured by actual numbers. Equity and inclusion are a little more difficult to quantitate. So how do we know that we are truly making strides in those areas? And then the second one, I'm sorry. In your research, what have you seen in regards to how organizations measure inclusion and accountability?
Yeah, so I think let's talk about, first of all, what can organizations do to figure out? You can't quantify it, but you can do self-studies. I think an organization has to be honest and open. And oftentimes in doing a self-study, you're not going to be able to do it yourself. That's one thing getting a person of color to walk into their manager's office and telling the manager how they feel about the racial climate in the organization, that person is going to feel threatened. They're going to worry about their job security. So the first thing I would say is bring in a professional, right? To gain, many of us in this area do consulting where we'll say, have meetings with employees based on confidentiality to try to find out. When your employees leave, look at your turnover. What is the basis of your turnover? I have seen organizations where they said, gee, we're not keeping the people. But where do your people go when they leave your organization? Do they get promotions? Do they go to, do they get higher salaries? Then that means that you are undervaluing the talent that you have. Remember what I talked about organizational commitment. People are not going to leave an organization if they're happy and they think they are treated fairly. We tend to leave when we think somebody is not recognizing our skills and somebody is not giving us the opportunity where we can use all of our professional acumen. And so, yes, we can't quantify it, but we can start doing self-studies in anonymous surveys and focus groups with outside professionals so that we can see how the members of our organization feel. I would also say, to the extent that your employees are feeling comfortable sharing negative feedback, things that they think need improvement in the organization, that is a strong sign that they feel comfort in the organization and they're not threatened. People do not share when they believe the organization is not inclusive.
The next question we have was, where or how do we get on-site support for prospective employees with intellectual developmental disabilities? And Jennifer and I agreed, I have the answer for that. So if you're looking at diversifying in that manner, we would suggest you start with talking to the Delaware Department of Labor, the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. They provide individualized services to employers and people with disabilities, developing career pathways that link qualified employees to jobs, resulting in greater independence and a more inclusive workplace. So if you're thinking that that's how one of the ways you'd like to diversify, and I think I can put the link for that in the chat. Or in the Q&A. I'll see if I can do that in either that or the chat. And then the next question we have is, I'm interested in strategies to help medium to large size businesses implement supplier diversity programs. So how do I find those minority businesses I can buy things from or use as subcontractors?
Yeah, so I think again, it's thinking in a similar way that you approach recruiting and retention, right? Think about what are the professional associations that have, in this case, you want diverse suppliers, or if you wanted diverse employees, you have to think about what professional association there is out there that can provide this force for you. And I know in the greater metro Philadelphia, Delaware area, there is an organization, a national organization that has a local group, and that's the National Minority Supplier Development Council. They advance business opportunities for certified minority-owned businesses. So I think one of the benefits of this organization is that they actually go in and do some screening on your behalf. I think if I'm a business person, I would want to make sure that when I'm bringing a supplier in, that supplier, is somebody who is going to have the specs to do the work, right, that I want, and that has been, vetted in some way. And so going to that NMSDC, actually their website is N for Nancy, M for Mary, S for Sam, D for David, and then C for cat.org. So National Minority Supplier Development Council. And there's a wealth of information there. According to their policies, it's that they do, they say that they are working with more than 12,000 minority-owned businesses. So that I think is a very good start. I don't know if you have, I think the SBDC also does something. So could you share about that?
Yes. We are happy to work with individuals doing research to find minority suppliers. So yeah, we can do that. There's now finally in Delaware, the Black Chamber of Commerce, which is a good place to start networking and looking for additional people. So yeah, that's two of the things we can do. Do we have, actually, let me take a minute, and Leanne, if you could share that last slide for us. Let me tell you a little bit about what the SBDC is doing right now. Particularly because of the pandemic, we have become painfully aware that businesses need to really focus on sustainability. And sustainability covers a number of different things. We have partnered with an organization called Green Street USA, and they've identified 7 areas that a business should have or strengthen in terms of becoming sustainable. One fits very well with today's topic: diversity, equity, and inclusion. So they would work with anybody to develop those kinds of programs. They also address risk and resilience, health, safety, and well-being, compliance, integrity, and ethics, energy and climate, waste, and stewardship, water management. So if anybody's interested in trying to develop a more sustainable business, please consider partnering with the SBDC. If you're interested, you can actually contact me. I will put my email in the chat, and it's pretty simple. It's just mrain@udel.edu, and make sure in the topic you put diversity, so I kind of know what you're interested in. But we are more than happy to begin working with small businesses in this area to help you become more diversified and make sure your business has identified potential risks and threats so that you can be more sustainable. And when the next big thing happens, which we at this point now know there is going to be something else, you'll be in a better position to weather through that. Does anybody else have any other questions or topics? Oh, the name of the organization for the suppliers. Yes. Do
you need me to repeat that organization?
Yes, please.
Okay, so it is the National Minority Supplier Development Council. And that's, if you go N Nancy, M Mary, S Sam, D David, and C cat.org. You will find their website. NMSCD. Okay, I put both of those in the chat. Yes, so great. Anything else? We've still got a couple minutes. I know Jennifer and I have had a lot of fun working on this program together and sharing stories. I've been working with small businesses for over 30 years, and I can tell you that I've seen a lot of small businesses, their employees are very loyal, particularly minority women-owned businesses, where they really feel like they're in an environment where they're respected and able to do well. They stick around. Yeah, and one other thing, I think it's terrific. Anybody who is here today means that, you know, they're interested in the topic, that they want to make a change. I will say that many times people are afraid. That's my experience in doing diversity work, is that people always say, well, I don't want to do X because I'm worried about, you know, is this a racist action, or will somebody say I'm being prejudiced by doing this? I think focus on what's in the heart, right? Not trying to worry about what people think. But if you let people know that your intentions are positive and that your intentions are good, I don't see anyone judging you harshly. You know, you might do something, let's say, that might not be perfect for the person, but if you explain that I'm doing this because I want the organization to be better, then, you know, if we all treat each other as we're coming from a positive place and from a place of grace, then, you know, this is positive growth for everyone. And the other thing I would say is important for all of us, which we've all been taught by our parents, is to listen, right? That is the key thing. Are we willing to listen to everyone? You know, we might disagree with their opinion, but listen.
That's great advice. And I would agree. So I want to just thank everybody for coming. We've had a great turnout today. I mean, it really is positive to see how many people are interested in this topic. You've got my email if you have questions, and if you think of questions you'd like Dr. Joe to answer later on, shoot me an email and I'll forward it to her. We'll try to get you an answer. I want to thank again all of our sponsors, Artisans Bank, BNY Mellon, Chase, Comcast, Discover, Harvey Hanna, Newcastle County Chamber of Commerce. I especially want to thank our partner in presenting these programs, the Delaware Business Times. We are currently planning to take a break for the summer, but we will be back in the fall with additional programs. We're going to try to get back to some of our more traditional family business-focused programs, but probably try to bring Jennifer back with some more ideas about diversity and inclusion, because I think everybody wants to know a little more about that as we kind of try to move forward in that direction. I see Michael's on, so I'm going to let him finalize the goodbyes, but thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in the fall.
Yes, thank you again, Jennifer and Margot. This was a really valuable conversation and session. So I took many notes. I'm sure many of those in the audience did as well. For all of you for joining us, we appreciate it. All the sponsors, of course, and we very much value our partnership with the SBDC to make these presentations possible. Our network area will remain open till about 1:30. So if you want to meet some folks who join you in interest in improving in this area, please hang around and do that on this neat platform. On behalf of everyone at the Delaware Business Times and the Small Business Development Center, have a great afternoon. Thank you for coming.
One last thing I want to add is if you, the program's been recorded, it's going to be up on the Delaware Business Times website. So if you want to listen to it again or recommend it to a friend, it will be available. So thanks again and have a great afternoon.